Kevin, I notice in your Monday morning column, your big lead today, doctor strike would be an act of self-harm. It's unequivocal, unapologetic. You say that they're making a huge mistake. Bit trigger-happy going on strike a second time.
I think they would be making a mistake on this occasion, and I sympathise with workers who are fighting for better pay, conditions, safe jobs, whatever it is. But you could see all the polling now shows they haven't got the public support they had 2 years ago because they've had those big pay rises, 5.4% this year, inflation being bigger than nurses got, or the people in the public services. And, of course, Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, settled the dispute inherited from the Conservatives with 22% over 2 years. So you put them together.
22.3, actually. 22.3% over 2 years, 5.4% above inflation this year. Most of us thought, this time last year, when the new government came in and sorted it, after, years of disputes, they'd sorted it, we thought it was over.
Yeah, but they look back to 2008. There was a big squeeze on wages after the global financial collapse, and then during the Conservative period, they were squeezed like never before. It wasn't just doctors, it was many, many people suffered that. And I understand why they want to get back. And look, doctors are highly skilled, trained, stressful job. They're lifesavers. So are other people in the NHS. A lot of other people do jobs that are incredibly important in the public and the private sectors, who you can argue are worth pay rises, but how do you organise that? And I just think with doctors, I think the relationship with patients is hugely important, and resident doctors, as they're now called, rather than junior doctors, hospital doctors they are. I think their relationship with patients is incredibly important, and I think you can break the trust and the respect if you're going on strike. And an NHS, and this is talking about England here, is getting back on its feet. Waiting lists are now falling month on month. And that'll all be jeopardised if they go on
So you're saying strike. It's bad timing and bad numbers crunching. What do you think, eh?
Yeah, well, worryingly, I agree with Kevin. I didn't know he had a column. I might have to start reading it now if you keep talking all this...
Sorry, it's only been 20 years, you know, don't worry.
It's always nice it's always nice to get a new reader.
I think you're confirming what I thought about the House of Lords.
We do remember a year ago, as Kevin was saying, the inflation-busting pay rise for doctors, and everybody supported that. Everybody, when we talked about doctor strikes in the past on this programme, we talked about life-saving work they do and how underpaid they were and how hard they work, resident doctors. So everybody, I think, applauded Wes Streeting making that award. I mean, there were some noises off saying, you know, can the country afford it? So I think after that happened, it's very hard for the junior doctors to make a case for strikes. They can make a case for pay rises, of course, but I think to take strike action, hold the country to ransom in this way, will not get the level of public support it got in the past. You saw Robert Winston, very well known, as it were, IVF doctor, does a lot of television, man in the 70s, Labour peer, so very experienced, resigning from the British Medical Association because he just said this is ridiculous. I'm putting words in his mouth, but the key point he made is this relationship of trust between doctors and patients. You've got patients, his words effectively were, you've got patients who, by definition, are vulnerable, subject to manipulation. He said you can't exploit that relationship in this way, was his view.
And he was very critical of what he described as the nuclear option.
Yeah, exactly.
Because, of course, rather like the police, doctors should not be going on strike lightly. Now, the police aren't allowed to go on strike. And when something like this is coming down the tracks at us, it raises the whole question again about whether doctors actually should be in a special category.
That's right. I mean, we saw nurses go on strike for the first time ever, I think, a few years ago. And I think the fact that strike action was taken really brought it home to the public what a desperate situation it was. But as I say, if Wes Streeting hadn't come along a year ago and done this settlement, maybe we would be more ambivalent today. But I think after that settlement...
I think it's a fundamental right of any worker to be able to join a trade union, organise and go on strike.
Including the police?
Including the police.
You think the
police were banned after the First World War. They were banned in 1919 after they'd gone on strike. They was quite successful, actually, in some parts of the country. Less successful in others, and some got sacked and never re-employed. But I think doctors, I don't dispute their right to do it. It's whether it is sensible and responsible to do it, and whether they will win this time.
Yeah.
Because I think Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, has already won the public's hearts and minds. They're with they're with him.
But there is a conflict, isn't there, with the Hippocratic Oath? There is a conflict.
Well,
I mean, I don't know what I think. I don't know whether I think doctors should be allowed to go on strike or not, but I can see the tension with the Hippocratic Oath, where you swear to basically do all you can to save and preserve life, and then you go on strike, and people are going to die.
It is.
Well, there will be a knock. There is no doubt there'll be a knock-on, and some people will suffer if you don't get your appointment, you don't get the treatment. Although they've always staffed accident emergency, and they always said they would go back if, for instance, there was a huge disaster or a terrorist incident. So I think we should be careful there, not to demonise them. I just think it's whether they're doing the right thing at the moment now. Disputes, disputes are won by
there is a cost to that, though, isn't there? There's a cost that they've estimated could be almost £30 million a day for the cost to Britain because of the, the days that people are going to have off, the appointments that are missed. And let's not forget, of course, waiting lists had been starting to come down, hadn't they? But this is going to have an impact on that as well. And that's another factor that I think will mean that the public won't look at this in the same way as perhaps they looked at it previously.
Yeah, I think absolutely right. I mean, I think, as I say, as Kevin was saying, Wes Streeting has probably won this argument before it's even begun. I don't even know when the ballot is due, whether they're serious about a ballot, whether this is a sort of...
It's all there, it's there.
Firing a shot before...
90% of them on a 55% turnout. The turnout was lower. I think it was 77% 2 years ago.
Well, Winston said he didn't even know about the vote.
Yeah.
He said that the vote actually wasn't disseminated widely enough for people like him to even know that it was taking place.
Exactly.
And had he known it, he would have voted against.
Yeah, but the peer, but he's not a resident doctor, so it's resident.
No, if he was, that's
right.
what he was saying.
Yeah. But of course, I think it shows there's some nervousness on wards. They're hospital doctors, call them resident doctors. They're hospital doctors. I think you look at the turnout, and any ballot is won by a single vote, like a simple majority. I opposed what the Conservatives did in the past with kind of having hurdles you had to clear, but I'm not sure as many. If it comes to this, if there is a strike from the 25th of July, I think they've set as the date. I don't think as many doctors will take part in it.
Yeah,
as you can see, because you can't be forced to go on strike. You can't. You wouldn't be kicked out of the BMA.
It'll just be interesting to see.
Possibly, but it would still have an impact.
I mean, are they choosing the end of July? I don't know what the statistics are, but whether or not there's fewer kind of cases in the summer.
Going into summer, well, you have to give notice in law, isn't it? You've got to give at least 2 weeks' notice of industrial action.
But still, there was the suggestion that whether they would be informing hospitals as to which staff were striking, so hospitals.
No, you don't need to legally do that.
I think
the wouldn't necessarily know whether they had to backfill staff.
I think the other problem is it's sort of come out of the blue. I mean, there's been no build-up to this. It's not as if a year ago they got a settlement. It's not as if there have been noises off saying this just isn't good enough. We're all struggling. We've talked to the government. You remember, I mean, during the doctor strikes, there was still endless kind of, is the government going to sit down with the doctors or not? Is the government going to sit down with them or not? And this hasn't happened this year. So there hasn't even been a build-up where they can say to the public, look, we've sat down with the government, we've put our case, they're just not listening, we've tried and tried and tried to negotiate a better settlement. It sort of feels like it's landed out of the blue.
They have been talking. They're going to talk again.
It's not got much coverage.
This week there's been a lot of toing and froing, and Streeting wrote a letter to the British Medical Association, which is a trade union, pointing out other areas he'd made progress on where you're posted and so on to try and make life better for doctors. The fact that British doctors will be prioritised for jobs in the NHS ahead of doctors coming in from other countries. And he did do that big settlement.
So what do you think the way through, just finally, is going to be on this? Because, the Health Department seem to have made it clear they're not going to budge on salaries, but they could look at working conditions.
Yeah,
is that going to be enough of a sort of
that's a really interesting point. I think
compromise? Will that get it through?
Wes Streeting is one of the most effective cabinet ministers this government has. I think he's quite well liked. He's got some pretty radical reforms for the NHS going forward. I think he strikes me as the sort of minister who will try and do as much as he can to help junior doctors outside, as it were, the pay settlement. So if there are ways to make your life eeasier as a junior doctor in terms of your contract, I'm sure those ways can be found.
If you're being reasonable and they say their pay is still 20% plus down in real terms on 2008, well, what you could do, you wouldn't expect to catch that up immediately because you've lost 17 years if we go back now. Streeting could say, let's look at your pay over a longer period. They use pay review bodies, but let's look and how it is down and how you might reasonably be able to cover up ground in the future. Do it that way.
A negotiation.
Yeah, because there's a big dispute over how much it is down. The figures are all over the place.
No dispute, really, in the papers, most of the papers this morning, about tax rises for pretty much everybody except the low-paid. I mean, very interesting language being used yesterday by Heidi Alexander, the Transport Secretary. She said in interviews on television yesterday morning that the government has promised not to increase taxes for people on modest incomes, and that Labour would base its policy on fairness. And you think, well, hang on, just a minute, didn't the manifesto say that there'd be no tax increases on working people? Well, she said again in a separate interview, we've made a commitment in our manifesto not to be putting up taxes on people on modest incomes, brackets working people. They never qualified that. We've gone through the manifesto with a tooth comb this morning. They only ever talked about working people. Now we're being told that there'll be no tax increases on people on modest incomes, whatever that means. It seems, by common consent, to mean that the middle classes are about to get to...
Yeah, it's called moving the goalposts, which is exactly what's happening. And after the failure of welfare reform and the failure on winter fuel payments, the government's got huge spending commitments which it hadn't anticipated, or rather, it can't make some of the...
But what do you make of this language?
Well, that they're moving the goalposts. They're changing the terminology and they're basically laying the groundwork for what might be what Neil Kinnock is calling for, which is a wealth tax on people with over £10 million of assets. Or it could be a tax which is basically where you don't raise the threshold, so you keep... It's called fiscal drag. You keep catching people in the higher rate of tax because you don't raise the threshold at which you pay the higher rate of tax. So the middle classes, which includes, you know, people who work in the police force and teachers and so on, all on incomes where they're now paying the higher rate of tax, which back in the day, 10, 20 years ago, you kind of thought was for people earning big six-figure salaries.
Yeah.
And,
so what this means is, for the majority of people, they will see some form of tax rise.
Not necessarily, because when they used in the manifesto working people, our noble lord is a working person. But
I wouldn't go that far.
He's probably not on a modest income. Right? So yeah,
what they said their definition was. Was it, though, Kevin? It wasn't what they said the definition of a working person was.
Oh, well, they never quite got.
They sort of said it's someone who can't really afford if an unexpected bill comes, like something happens to your boiler or things like that. Yeah. That was kind of their definition of a working person.
Starmer said that in one interview, then they spent the rest of the election campaign moving away from that.
The trouble about this vague language, though, isn't it? That we, you know, what it means is that people will be hit with tax rises.
Well, it gives them scope to slip slide around the issue. And it's clear from what's happened and the U-turns that Labour have had to do over the last year that tax rises are on the the way. I mean,
tax rises are on the way because we won't get to grips. We won't get to grips with other things which do need sorting out. Welfare does need sorting out. However compassionate you might be feeling, the idea that every pound of welfare is spent sensibly. We no longer have face-to-face interviews, for example, for sickness benefits. David Willetts, very well-respected former pension minister, has an article in the paper today made about the pension triple lock, which we've become fixated by as politicians. We're now spending £10 billion a year more on pensions than if we hadn't had the pensions triple lock. All of these settlements, pensioners are now richer than children, as it were. There are more children in poverty than there are pensioners in poverty. That's completely changed. All of these issues we are not tackling. And weirdly, they're not being tackled by a government which has got a massive thumping majority which can't get its own welfare bill through Parliament and past its backbenchers.
Well, first of all, you go about the state pension. 230, 240 quid a week. It's low by European standards. It's hardly a king's ransom. Secondly, you've got to pay national insurance over 35 years to qualify for that full state pension. If you're better off,
these are choices.
It's probably because you've got a private pension or your property is gone up value. And you saw the backlash over ending universal winter fuel.
Yeah, which was ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous.
Some well-off pensioners were so, I'm really just concerned about lower-income people losing it. No, they weren't. They were also concerned about losing it themselves. So you start trying to take away their state pension.
I agree with that. I agree. Give someone
mother of all backlashes.
Absolutely, but I mean, they can't do anything. They can't change welfare. They can't change sickness benefits. They can't change pension.
Do you want them to break?
No, I would like somebody to get to grips with the fact that we have an ageing population, we have an out-of-control welfare budget, and something needs to be done because we cannot keep spending on the company.
I think what we'd all like is straight talking. Something else that Heidi Alexander was asked about yesterday was a wealth tax. Is that coming down the tracks, despite all the promises that it would never happen? She was asked directly, and she said she was asked if they'd actually discussed this in Cabinet on Friday, the wealth tax, and she said not directly, not directly, but declined to rule out the introduction of a wealth tax later this year. And it makes you wonder if all this slippery, sliding use of language to leave options open here, there and everywhere leads to a headline like this. Politicians, we don't trust any of you.
Well, I'm shocked.
This is...
frankly, I'm shocked.
I wonder how many times we've read that story over the last 50 years.
This is a poll that says almost 90% of people have little or no faith in the political class. 60% said they wouldn't even trust Keir Starmer, Kemi Badenoch or Nigel Farage to watch their bags.
That's 10%, though, back you. Ed, you're backed by 10%. It's a small base, but you can build on it. 10%.
We can't even trust you to look after our bags. Is that right?
Does that mean they think that they walk away with it?
I don't know.
Or that they simply wouldn't guard it and let someone else walk away with it?
They can't be trusted.
There's a whole range of options there. Rifle through it. I mean, who knows where we could go. I mean, to a certain extent, I mean, you have to roll with the punches as a politician on this kind of stuff. I mean, it's been like this for 300 years. It's one of the reasons we like being British, because we hate our politicians, always take the mickey out of them and parody them and satirise them. It is unfortunate. I mean, it does come down to leadership. It does come down to a belief in whether you think the leader of the country and the political party is taking the country in the right direction. It's interesting that Farage is included in that. You know, the rise of reform, in my view, is partly a phenomenon of the complete disillusionment with the mainstream parties. You've seen lots of other parties doing well, which is, again, a side effect of this. The Greens doing well. Jeremy Corbyn's now got a new party, which people think will do well. So people are kind of splintering away from the mainstream parties, mainly because of this, the belief that everything's been tried, nothing's working. No one has the courage to tell the public what needs to be done and then to do it.
And massive U-turns by this government don't help, do they?
No, because you got it wrong in the first place if you got a U-turn. But I still think it's better to U-turn than to head off in the wrong direction.
I prefer the other.
Smash.
I prefer to...
Well, you just get it wrong, go off the cliff or into the brick wall, so you smash,
Now, look...
I think you tried that to destruction, actually, in the, when you were in government, didn't you?
But there's something
on the
about...
economy and welfare cuts then.
In this poll, they also talk about people's view of the country, and the most common words are broken, mess, struggling, divided, expensive. You know, it's a worrying time, isn't it, when people's view of the situation that we're in at the moment is so negative.
Yeah, and you want hope and optimism, and you want to create that. It's not there. But then we had the global financial shock. We've had COVID. We've had sort of Liz Truss, Putin's invasion of Ukraine, which sent the economy into a nosedive. We've had Brexit, which didn't give the people who wanted to leave what they thought they were going to get. So we've had a lot of shocks. Then we've got Donald Trump. Not very good.
Should we talk about that?
Let's talk about him. He's due here in September now.
17th to the 19th.
Mark
that in your diaries.
We've got the dates.
We have.
Near my diary.
Yeah, we've all been checking our diaries to make sure that we're working that week, because it's going to be a fascinating week. We know that when Trump gets here, things are going to happen where they happen off-piste. Yeah. He's going to say things, he's going to do things that you couldn't possibly predict. It's for a journalist, it's a cornucopia of pleasure.
Oh, bad news is good news. Good news is no news.
You've got it in one.
Trump coming.
But what do we think about the timing here? Because he's coming in the middle of September, Parliament won't be sitting. So that prospect of Trump addressing MPs or even Lords is not going to happen.
He comes on the 17th, Parliament sits until the 16th.
Exactly.
He comes the day
convenient,
after.
Wasn't it?
Well, I think it's
Talk
rather...
about timing.
It's a neat way of stopping him having to address MPs and peers, risking protests and also the security nightmare of the middle of London. They want to put him in the castle in Windsor, keep him there, send him up to his golf course in Turnberry. It'd be a lot easier to manage. No, I think it's really neat. I can't believe he's fallen for it. But it probably shows people in the State Department and the White House are a bit more sensible and...
Well, there's some sympathy for him, actually, from our viewers. Tracy on X, which I hate calling X, it's Twitter. We all know it's Twitter, don't we? She said it's beyond disrespectful and disgraceful that President Trump will not be allowed to speak to Parliament. Well, it's not being allowed.
He's a coup leader, isn't he? He tried to... He had his mates, I suppose, storm his own Parliament, Congress. So you know what, the coup leader coming into our
Well, she draws the
Parliament.
comparison with Macron. She said the French president was allowed to. Mark says via email, love or loathe Trump, he hits the right buttons and doesn't take any prisoners. So there is support.
Well, don't forget that Macron, when he addressed the Houses of Parliament, was asked to do so in our Royal Gallery, which has a 100-foot painting of the defeat of the French at Trafalgar on one side and a 100-foot painting of the defeat of the French at Waterloo on the other side. So it was a kind of exercise in British subtle humiliation. But I do think, I mean, you know, whatever one thinks of Trump, as you say, and you're, you know, speaking as journalists, you know, it's prime time stuff. I mean, it is absolutely, you cannot ever tear your eyes away from the screen when Trump is speaking. You cannot quite believe a president of the United States is saying the kind of things he says. And some of it is quite kind of funny, amusing, without any kind of particular importance. The constant kind of, you know, it was all Biden's fault and I'm just great and it's fantastic. Some of it's pretty sinister, but it's going to be, as Kevin says, I do think, again, the kind of British state, whatever you think of them, has done a masterstroke in Windsor, well away from central London, not addressing Parliament, so not having to deal with that dilemma. Trump will love it. It's his second state visit. You saw how when Keir Starmer handed him the letter, what a masterstroke that was when Starmer went to Washington. Starmer appears completely bizarrely, because I don't know either of them, obviously, but they do appear to have very different personalities. They appear to have this incredible friendship. I don't know how that came about.
But not every state visit includes an address to both houses of Parliament. Although, given this as the second, the so-called unprecedented second, you would have thought it would have been involved. But,
have you heard the latest of Trump's statements over the weekend? Rosie O'Donnell, the broadcaster in America, has been openly critical of Trump and quite funny, actually, about him, quite satirical. And he said he's going to deprive her of her US citizenship.
Yes.
This is fascistic.
She's born in New York State.
Yeah, but this is...
You can't do this.
This is fascistic and authoritarian. As much as I dislike Elon Musk, every time he speaks out against Trump threatens to pull federal contracts.
And deport him.
Yeah, that is not how a democratic leader works. You should get those contracts because you've tendered for them and you can offer the best service for the public, not because you've had a backhander and the bloke in charge just so you can take
depriving a media critic of his or her citizenship in revenge for verbal attack. It's ridiculous.
But Trump has this view that he is entitled to do whatever he wants. He's got a Supreme Court that is 6-3 in his favour and is more and more kind of agreeing with some of his initiatives. It is a very, very worrying time because the US Constitution is meant to rein in the executive powers of a president, and it's not doing it at the moment. And regardless of whether he could ever do this to a journalist, the fact that he can say it is incredibly intimidating. I mean, massively intimidating. And it kind of... There is this kind of slightly kind of climate of fear where people don't say what they genuinely think of the president.
It's not worth it. It's not worth
it's interesting, this whole tactic, isn't it, of us welcoming him for a state visit with open arms.
Well,
that idea of soft
The other thing
power.
you've now got to do is, which is now standard operating procedure, is to nominate him for the Nobel Peace Prize. And if you're not going to do that, Charlotte, when he comes over in September, you're not getting in the inner
Very
space.
quickly, just over a week ago now, a 30-something business executive, a woman, got on a plane in Los Angeles and she flew to London and she went to the West End and she met the King's advisors. She was the press advisor to Prince Harry.
I like the way you built up to that.
Well,
exciting.
try and tell a
we
story.
all wondered what was coming, didn't we?
It was a meeting that took place in the West End on a rooftop restaurant in the sunshine. Drinks were had. No one knows quite what the conversation was, but all the speculation in the Sundays yesterday, looking at these photographs, were that there's some kind of reconciliation going on now between Harry and his dad. What do we think?
Well, first of all, I think it's very interesting that photographs were taken. Amazing to have a professional photographer just wandering past a rooftop.
That was a coincidence, wasn't it?
It's a public... Two senior...
but
come on.
It's a public place. Clearly, talks have been going on in the background between Harry and his father. Because the press people don't say, right, let's get together, we'll get Harry and Chaz...
the King, His Majesty.
To mend their relationship.
Which would be a good thing.
So it's clearly... As a parent, just looking from the outside, of course you would want a father and son to chat. I see William's not in this, the brother.
No.
I suppose he's banished ever since he broke Harry's necklace. And that's
it's got to be a good thing.
So the alleged assault.
Despite everything that's gone on between Meghan and Harry and the royal family, I think Harry remains residually very popular with the public. I think it would be a matter of moments if he decided, as it were, to come back into the fold. for him to regain his popularity. I mean, he's pushed it about as far as he can, but I think that he's very popular. I don't quite know how Meghan would fit into this, given how she appears to operate. But it's got to be a good thing to get him back in.
I agree.
And we will wait to see if they have a meeting, because, of course, no doubt Harry will be here for the Well Child Awards, which is in September. So we will see whether that leads...
Yeah, I mean, social workers are under tremendous strain, so they won't have to intervene with his dysfunctional family anymore.